My husband refused to take me to the hospital during labor and instead, he insisted we stop for lunch. I still don't know if I'm more horrified by what happened or the fact that I didn't leave him right then and there. But let me explain, because even now when I think back to that day I get chills. It was a Saturday and I was overdue. I'd been feeling mild contractions for hours and I was pretty sure it was finally time. I tried to be calm. This was our first baby and I knew we should head to the hospital. But instead of being the reassuring partner I'd hoped for, my husband Dan kept insisting we weren't in a rush. "Let's just grab something to eat first," he said. "You'll be fine for another hour." I tried to explain that the contractions were coming closer together, but he just brushed me off. I'll admit I was scared. But I was also in so much pain that I didn't know how to argue. Dan wasn't usually like this, usually attentive, caring, but there was something off that day. I asked if we should at least call the doctor, but he just gave me that smile. The kind you get when you've been married long enough to know they're not hearing you, but you're too tired to fight anymore. "Don't worry about it, hon, we're going to be fine." So we drove to this small diner, the kind that hasn't changed in decades, with peeling vinyl booths and an air thick with grease. I was in agony by the time we sat down, my whole body aching, and the contractions were now almost unbearable. But Dan just smiled and ordered his sandwich like it was any other day. No urgency. No concern. I remember the waitress being uncomfortable when I asked to use the bathroom again, my breath shallow and panicked. I hadn't even looked in the mirror, but I could feel my face was pale, sweat beading on my forehead. When I came back, Dan was finishing his meal, completely oblivious to how pale and sick I must have looked. He didn't even ask if I was okay. He just stared at his plate. "You know, you should try the fries," he said as if nothing was wrong. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told him I was really scared and he just waved me off. "Relax. We're fine." His voice was calm, too calm. Then it hit me, he wasn't acting like a husband. He was acting like he didn't care. I don't know how much time passed after that, but eventually we made it to the hospital. The baby was born hours later. Thankfully, everything was okay. But when I looked at Dan that night lying next to me in the hospital room, I realized something. He didn't seem relieved or worried or even particularly happy. He just seemed normal. Like he'd done me a favor by bringing me here at all. We never talked about that lunch again. But I never forgot it. And now when I think back on it, it's the weirdest thing. When I went to get the hospital bill a few weeks later, I noticed something strange. Dan had paid the bill from his phone while we were still at the diner. The transaction time was listed, 2:13 p.m. The same time I had begged him to take me to the hospital.